When a notorious biker gang decided to target a small roadside coffee stand, they thought they'd found an easy mark. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman behind the counter wasn't just serving coffee. She was serving justice. Federal Judge Maria Evans had dedicated her life to transforming lives from the bench. But on this day, she would transform an entire community from behind an espresso machine. This is the incredible true story of how one woman's strength turned a gang of intimidators into protectors of the very community they once terrorized. I'm so excited to share this incredible true story with you. It's the amazing tale of how one woman's strength turned a gang of intimidators into protectors of the very community they once terrorized. Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? And if you enjoy stories like this, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got another amazing tale waiting for you tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows across Morning Light Coffee's well. Every Wednesday, Maria Evans tied her apron with practiced ease. She traded her judge's robes for this simple black apron, finding peace in the ritual of helping at her sister Elena's coffee stand. To the regulars, she was just Maria, the kind woman who remembered their orders and always had a warm smile ready. As the retired police officer approached the counter, his weathered face broke into a familiar grin. "You know it, Maria," he said. "Still the best coffee in 3 counties." Tom leaned against the counter, his eyes twinkling. "How's it going?" he asked. "Elena is doing really well with the new location. She's got a great eye for business." Maria started preparing Tom's drink, a double espresso with a splash of cream. "I think she secretly opened this spot just to keep me sane. One morning a week away from the courthouse is just what I need. It's so peaceful here." The peaceful morning was suddenly shattered by the distant rumble of motorcycles. Tom's expression shifted, and his old cop instincts kicked in as the sound grew louder. 6 bikes rolled into the parking lot, their chrome glinting in the morning sun. The Storm Riders MC had arrived, and their reputation preceded them. Jake, first to dismount, was Thunder Thompson, his leather cut displaying the club's colors proudly. Next came Marcus Tank Davidson, his massive frame casting a shadow across the pavement. The rest of the crew fell in line, including Danny Razor Martinez, Mike Ghost Wilson, and 2 prospects whose nervous energy was palpable. Well, Jake announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we found ourselves a nice little spot." His smirk grew as he watched several customers shift uncomfortably. It was time to introduce ourselves to the neighborhood. Sarah, the young barista working with Maria, tensed up a bit. As the bikers approached, Maria whispered to Sarah, "Maybe we should call someone." Maria placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder and said, "It's all right, just stay calm and let me handle this." The bikers pushed their way to the front of the line, ignoring the protests of waiting customers. Jake leaned against the counter with a smirk on his face. "Morning, sweetheart. Nice little setup you got here." "Good morning," Maria replied, her voice even and warm. "There's a line if you'd like to order. I'll be happy to serve you when it's your turn." Jake's smirk faltered slightly, then returned with edge. "Maybe you didn't hear me the first time," Maria said with a warm smile. "Listen up, everyone. I think it's important to remember that this is Storm Riders territory now. In our territory, we make the rules. Tank, you know we're next, right? Tom, you're getting pretty worked up there. Take a deep breath. Maria, you've got my eye. I know you have a problem with that. I do too. But we can't let it get out of hand. This is a place of business, and we all follow the same rules, even the Storm Riders." "Jake, you're getting a bit too excited there. Come on now. We can work this out. It seems you're not quite up to speed with who we are and how things work around here. Let me fill you in. Either you play by our rules, or things might get a little tricky." "Is that a threat, Mr. Thompson?" Maria's voice had a newfound authority, and Jake felt a moment of pause. "You know my name," he stammered. A hint of uncertainty crossed his face. "I know quite a bit about you and the Storm Riders. In fact, I believe you're scheduled to appear in my courtroom next week." Maria Evans, a federal judge, smiled warmly. "I much prefer serving coffee to serving sentences," she added. The color drained from Jake's face as the implications sank in. Other bikers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado evaporating. Tank took a step back, his intimidating presence suddenly less certain. A judge, Razor, muttered, "Boss, maybe we should." Jake held up a hand, silencing him. His smirk returned, but it was forced. Well, ain't that interesting?" A judge slumming it at a coffee stand thought. "Wonder what the papers would think about that. They'd probably find it less interesting than your upcoming racketeering case." Maria replied evenly. Now, would you like to order something, or are you done attempting to intimidate my sister's business? The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Customers watched the exchange with a mix of fear and fascination. Tom remained ready to intervene, though Maria's calm control of the situation made it clear she didn't need help. Jake studied Maria for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this unexpected turn of events. Finally, he straightened up, adjusting his leather cut. "You know what I'm not feeling," he said with a smile. "Coffee today, boys, let's ride." The bikers began backing away, their exit less dramatic than their entrance. But Jake wasn't finished. He turned back at the door, his voice full of warmth. "I'm sorry, but I have to say that I disagree with you. This is not about your honor." "I think you're mistaken, Mr. Thompson," Maria replied. "It's just beginning, and how it ends is entirely up to you." The storm riders roared out of the parking lot, leaving behind a wake of tension and uncertainty. Sarah let out a shaky breath. She hadn't realized she was holding Maria. "What are we going to do?" Maria began wiping down the counter. Her movements were deliberate and calm. "We're going to serve coffee," she said. "We're going to serve coffee," Sarah replied. "And next week, when Mr. Thompson and his friends appear in my courtroom, we're going to serve justice. People need to learn that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about standing up for what's right." Tom watched the bikers disappear down the highway, then turned back to Maria with a knowing smile. "You know they'll be back," he said. "I'm counting on it," Maria replied. "Some people need to learn their lessons in a courtroom. Others need to learn them over a cup of coffee. Either way, I'll be ready." The morning sun continued its climb, casting shorter shadows across the counter as customers slowly returned to their routines. But something had changed at Morning Light Coffee. A line had been taken, and a simple coffee stand had become the unlikely battleground for a showdown between justice and intimidation. The storm riders would indeed return, but they would find that they had messed with the wrong woman, a woman who served both coffee and justice with equal measure. The next morning, Elena arrived early to find Maria already at the coffee stand, methodically checking the equipment. "You didn't have to come in today," Elena said, setting down her purse. "It's not your usual Wednesday after yesterday." "I'm exactly where I need to be, Maria." She tested the espresso machine, her movements precise. "Besides, I have a feeling our new friends might return." Elena's face tightened with worry. "I heard about the storm riders. Tom called me last night. Maybe we should close for a few days just until things settle down. That's exactly what they want." "I agree," Maria replied. Her voice was firm, but there was fear in her eyes. "They want to trade fear for power. We can't let them do that here." The morning crowd began trickling in, though noticeably smaller than usual. Sarah arrived for her shift. Her usual cheerful demeanor was subdued. "I almost called in sick," she admitted, tying her apron. "Then I thought about how you stood up to them, Maria. I want to be brave like that. Bravery isn't about not being scared." Maria told her it's about doing what's right despite being scared. The morning progressed quietly until the rumble of motorcycles cut through the air again. This time it wasn't the full gang, just Jake and Tank rolling into the parking lot with deliberate slowness. The few customers present quickly gathered their things and left. Jake sauntered up to the counter, his smirk firmly in place. "Morning, Your Honor. I had some time to think about our conversation yesterday." Mr. Thompson, Maria acknowledged calmly. "Would you like to order something today, or are we still pretending this is about Tank?" Stepped forward, his massive frame looming. "Watch your tone, Lady Judge, or not, you're still on our turf." Actually, Elena spoke up, surprising everyone. "This is my turf," she said. "I own this property, and I decide who's welcome here." Jake's smirk widened. "Ownership's a funny thing sometimes," he said. "Accidents happen. Property changes hands. Would be a shame if something happened to this nice little setup. Are you threatening my sister?" Mr. Thompson, Maria's voice carried an edge of steel. Edge of steel because that would be a very poor decision, especially given your current legal situation. "I'm not threatening you," Jake replied smoothly. "I'm just having a friendly business discussion. Right, Tank?" Tank cracked his knuckles meaningfully. "I'm just trying to be friendly." "Let me be clear," Maria said, stepping around the counter to face Jake directly. "Your case comes before me next week. Every threat you make and every attempt at intimidation only proves that you're exactly what the prosecution claims. A criminal organization that preys on legitimate businesses. You can't use this against us in court, can you?" Maria asked kindly. "Your behavior here demonstrates a clear pattern of criminal activity. In fact, everything you're doing is being recorded, so please continue making threats. You're only building the case against yourself." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jake's face. He hadn't counted on the cameras. The cameras and tank shifted uncomfortably, and his intimidating presence diminished slightly. "You think you're so smart," Jake growled, "but you don't know what you're dealing with. The storm riders don't back down, not for anyone." "Perhaps it's time you learned," Maria replied gently. "This isn't just about coffee anymore. It's about justice, community, and standing up to bullies who thinks they can take whatever they want." Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You really want to make enemies of us? We can make life very difficult for you and your sister. I can make sure you spend the next decade in federal prison." Maria countered, her voice calm and reassuring. "Your choice, Mr. Thompson. Walk away now, or face the consequences of your actions." Tension crackled between them for a moment. It seemed like Jake might do something rash, but then Tank placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we should think this through," she said kindly. "She's got cameras and that court date." Jake gave a little shrug, but he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice full of emotion. "Not by a long shot." "Actually it is," Maria replied firmly, her voice steady and calm. The bikers retreated to their motorcycles, the roar of their engines carrying a promise of return as they disappeared down the highway. Elena let out a shaky breath. "Maria, what are you doing? These men are dangerous, and so is letting them think they can control people through fear." I watched the interaction with wide eyes, but what if they come back with the whole gang? "Oh, Maria," I said, returning to the counter. "If they do, they'll learn that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." The rest of the morning passed in intense anticipation, but the storm riders didn't return. As the morning wore on, customers began to return, eager to share the news about how Judge Evans had stood up to the notorious bikers. Tom lingered a bit longer than usual, his retired cop instincts on high alert. "Maria," he said quietly as the morning rush died down, "you're playing a dangerous game. I've dealt with the storm riders before, and they don't take kindly to being challenged." "I know," Maria replied, wiping down the counter. "Someone needs to show them that their tactics don't work here. This community is stronger than their intimidation, and you think you're the one to do it." Maria paused, looking out at the highway where the bikers had disappeared. "I think sometimes justice needs a personal touch. They came here expecting to find in. They thought they were an easy target, but they found someone who understands both law and justice and knows the difference between the two." The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the coffee stand. Maria knew the confrontation was far from over. The storm riders would probably return in greater numbers, trying to prove their dominance, but she had drawn a line in the sand. The sand, and she wouldn't back down. This quiet coffee stand had become more than just a refuge from her duties as a judge. It had become a battlefield in a larger war against intimidation and fear. Maria Evans was ready for whatever came next as evening settled over morning light coffee. Maria, Elena, and Sarah stayed late discussing their next steps for the day. The confrontation had left them all feeling a bit on edge, but they were determined. Maria was in the middle of outlining a security plan when the rumble of multiple motorcycles shattered the peaceful twilight. "There they are," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling as she peered through the window. "There's more of them this time." The storm riders rolled into the parking lot, their bikes forming a. Jake led the pack, followed by Tank Razor, Ghost, and at least 8 other members. Their leather cuts gleamed in the fading light. The gang's emblem was a stark warning. "Elena, Sarah, go to the back," Maria said calmly, untying her apron and calling Tom. She didn't think it was the right time to call the police. "But Maria, you can't face them alone," Elena protested. "I'm not," Maria replied. "I'm not alone," Maria replied, her eyes fixed on the approaching bikers. "I have the law on my side." Jake pushed through the door first, his swagger more pronounced than before. The rest of the gang filed in behind him, filling the small space with their intimidating presence. The air grew thick with tension. "Evening, Your Honor," Jake sneered. "We'd bring some friends by." "For coffee, I hope that's not a problem," Maria said with a warm smile. She stood her ground behind the counter, her posture relaxed but alert. "The stands are closed, Mr. Thompson, but I'm sure you didn't come here for coffee anyway." Tank moved to flank Jake, his massive frame casting long shadows in the evening light. "Maybe we just wanted to have a friendly chat about territory and respect," he said. "You know," Maria replied evenly, "that's not something your organization seems to have forgotten." Jake's smirk turned dangerous. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Standing there acting all high and mighty, but out here you're not in your courtroom. Out here, different rules apply." The law applies everywhere, Mr. Thompson. Even here, the law. Jake laughed, the sound harsh and cutting. Judge, I see your point, but I also see a lot of other things. It seems like you're trying to play the hero, but it's not just you. It's like you're alone in this, trying to take control. I get it. I do. But Jake, you're leaning against the counter, and accidents happen. Small businesses get broken into all the time. Fires break out. It's a real shame when that happens, Maria's voice remained steady. Are you actually threatening arson and vandalism in front of a federal judge while being recorded? That's quite bold, even for the storm riders. Jake's expression darkened. You think those cameras scare us? You think anything scares us? I think you're already scared, Maria replied. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to bring your entire gang to intimidate a coffee stand. Real strength doesn't need an audience, Mr. Thompson. The words hit home. Jake's facade cracked slightly. Jake's anger was evident, and it was clear he didn't fully understand what it meant to have true strength. He nodded to Tank, who stepped forward and cracked his knuckles. Before he could move further, the door chimed, and Tom Cooper walked in, followed by David Chun and several other regular customers. They moved to stand near Maria, their message clear. She wasn't alone. Tom said, "Evening, Jake," in a casual tone. His presence as a former police officer filled the room, and it seemed he was causing trouble again. Jake's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. The situation had changed, but backing down would mean losing face in front of his crew. "This wasn't your business, old man," Jake said gently. "Actually, it is," David Chin replied. "This coffee stand is part of our community, and we protect our own." The storm riders shifted uneasily. This wasn't how they'd expected the evening to play out. Maria watched the change in their demeanor with careful attention. "You see, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "that's the difference between intimidation and real strength. Real strength brings people together." Jake's fists clenched as he struggled with his options. Finally, he straightened up, adjusting his cut. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Maria replied, "It is because come Monday morning, I'm going to recuse myself from your case." Jake's head snapped up in surprise. "What? I can't be impartial now, given our interactions. So your case will go to Judge Harrison." Maria's slight smile carried weight. "Just between us, he'll be much less lenient." Jake's face suddenly drained of color. Judge Harrison was known for handing down harsh sentences, especially when it came to organized crime. "You set us up," he realized too late. "No, Mr. Thompson. You did that all by yourself. Every threat, every act of intimidation you've done has shown exactly what kind of organization you run. And now you'll face the consequences." Jake looked around the room, seeing his power play for what it was. His crew was already backing toward the door, their earlier confidence shattered. "Let's ride," he said, trying to. It was a bit of a rough day, but we all knew the truth. The storm riders had lost this battle before it even began, as the bikers filed out. Maria's voice followed them. "Mr. Thompson, your court date is still Monday. I'd suggest showing up with a better attitude than you've displayed here." The sound of motorcycles filled the air as the gang sped away. Their retreat was marked by the same noise they'd arrived with, but this time it sounded more like desperation than intimidation. Tom turned to Maria with a grin. "Judge Harrison, that was quite the show." Maria replied, straightening the displays that had been knocked over. They had come expecting to find weakness, but instead they found a community ready to stand together. Elena and Sarah emerged from the back, relief evident on their faces. "Do you think they'll really stay away?" Sarah asked. Maria looked out at the darkness where the bikers had disappeared. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "But next time they'll be facing more than just us. They'll be facing the power of a united community. That's something no amount of intimidation can overcome." Monday morning arrived with a tension that hung heavy in the courthouse air. Maria sat in her chambers, reviewing the storm riders' case file. She was going to submit her recusal, and the evidence was substantial. It included racketeering, extortion, intimidation of local businesses, and now their actions at Morning Light Coffee had added another layer to their criminal pattern. She was interrupted by a knock on her door. It was District Attorney James Phillips. "Come in," she said, her expression concerned. "Judge Evans, we need to talk about the storm rider case. I've heard you're recusing yourself." "I'm sorry to hear that, James. They made the mistake of targeting my sister's coffee stand. I can't be impartial now." The DA sat down, running a hand through his graying hair. "Exactly. That's why we need you on this case. You've seen firsthand what they're capable of, which is precisely why I can't preside over it." Maria replied firmly, "But don't worry, Judge Harris will handle it appropriately. A ghost of a smile crossed Philip's face. Harrison, that's. Sometimes it's important to send a clear message to justice before they can continue. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. They're here. All of them. Maria's jaw tightened. Excuse me, James. I need to handle something. The Storm Riders. He asked. Rising wants me to call in backup, but not yet. Let's see how they handle actual consequences first. Maria drove to the coffee stand, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. As she pulled into the lot, she saw them. The entire Storm Riders MC. Their bikes lined up like a wall of chrome and steel. Jake stood at the counter. Leaning in close to Elena while Tank and the others spread throughout the space, Maria entered quietly, assessing the situation. Elena's face was pale but determined as she faced down Jake's final warning. Jake was saying, "Sign over the property or things get ugly." "The only ugly thing here is your attempt at intimidation." Maria's voice cut through the tension, especially on the morning of your court appearance. Jake spun around, his face twisting with anger. This is all your fault," he said, his voice full of emotion. "No, Mr. Thompson. This is the consequence of your own actions. Now, I'd like to add witness intimidation to your charges, or would you like to leave while you still can?" Tank stepped forward, his patience clearly worn thin. "We're done playing games with you, Judge. This ends today." "I couldn't agree more," Maria replied, pulling out her phone. "I've just texted District Attorney Phillips. He's very interested in your organization's latest activities." As Maria's words sank in, the atmosphere shifted. Razor, always the cautious one, spoke up. "Boss, we should go. This isn't worth it." "Shut up," Jake snapped, but his voice carried. "I'm sorry, but we're not backing down, not now." "Then let me be clear," Maria said, stepping closer. "Every moment you stay here, every threat you make is being recorded and added to your case file." Judge Harrison is particularly interested in organizations that show no remorse or willingness to change. The mention of Harrison's name had its intended effect. Several gang members shifted uncomfortably, and even Tank took a step back. "You think you're so clever," Jake snarled, using the law like a weapon. "The law isn't a weapon, Mr. Thompson. It's a shield protecting those who need it from those who would abuse their power. Right now, you're proving exactly why that shield is necessary." Elena moved to stand beside her sister, her fear replaced by determination. "Our family has run businesses in this community for 3 generations. We're not going anywhere." Boss Ghost spoke up for the first time. "We need to go now." Jake's face showed his frustration. He pointed at Maria. His finger shook a little. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. Actually, Mr. Thompson, it is because now you have a choice. You can leave now and face your charges like. It was a tough choice. Stay and add to their numbers, or leave and face your own charges." Jake's resolve crumbled as he realized he was backed into a corner. He was a Storm Rider after all. He barked, "We're out." The gang members couldn't leave fast enough. Their earlier bravado was replaced by urgent self-preservation. Preservation. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as they sped away. Just as the first police cruiser turned into the lot, Deputy Sarah Martinez stepped out, taking in the scene. "Judge Evans, everything okay?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," replied Deputy Maria Evans. "Just some potential defendants making poor decisions, though you might want to note that the Storm Riders were here attempting to intimidate witnesses before their court appearance. I'm sure Judge Harrison will find that very interesting." Elena hugged her sister tightly. "I was so scared," she whispered. "But I knew you'd come. I'll always come." "That's what family does," Maria replied. "That's what community does." As the deputies took statements and gathered evidence, Maria looked out at the highway where the Storm Riders had disappeared. She knew this wasn't truly over. Men like Jake Thompson didn't give up easily, but something had changed today. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time, the Storm Riders were feeling the weight of real justice bearing down on them. "They'll try something else," Elena said, reading her sister's thoughts. "Let them try," Maria replied. "They're learning the hard way that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." The morning sun climbed higher, casting new light on the coffee stand that had become an unlikely battleground for justice was now a scene of unexpected drama. The Storm Riders had wanted to teach a lesson about power, but they were learning one about justice, community, and the strength that comes from standing together against intimidation. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Jake Thompson and the Storm Riders filed into Judge Harrison's courtroom. Maria watched from the gallery, noting how different they looked in court. They were all dressed up in suits instead of their leather cuts. Even Tank's massive frame seemed a little smaller without his gang colors. Judge Harrison was a stern woman in her 60s who peered over her reading glasses at the defendants. "Mr. Thompson, I understand there was an incident this morning involving witness intimidation," she said. Jake's lawyer was a nervous man in an ill-fitting suit. "The fitting suit stood up quickly, My Honor. My client denies any wrongdoing." "Save it," Harrison cut him off. "I've seen the security footage. In fact, I've seen quite a bit of footage over the past few days. Would you care to explain why your client thought it was appropriate to threaten a federal judge and her family's business?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The swagger he'd shown at the coffee stand was nowhere to be seen. Behind him, several storm clouds gathered. Riders exchanged worried glances. District Attorney Phillips rose, "Your Honor, in light of these new events, the state would like to amend the charges to include witness intimidation, attempted extortion, and criminal harassment." "Objection," Jake's lawyer sputtered. "These new allegations haven't been properly overruled." Harrison snapped, "Mr. Thompson, stand up." Jake rose slowly, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "I've been watching you." Harrison continued the protection rackets, the intimidation, and the way you prey on small businesses. "Now you've escalated to threatening a federal judge and her family." "I'm sorry, Jake, but I'm going to have to revoke your bail right now." Before he could respond, the courtroom doors burst open, and Elena rushed in. Her face was pale, and she ignored courthouse protocol. She said, "The stand, they vandalized everything." Some of the supporters in the gallery began to murmur, and a few even smirked. But their satisfaction was short-lived. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Bayeth, take Mr. Thompson and his associates into custody now," the judge said. Jake's lawyer protested. "Your Honor, you can't prove my clients had anything to do with this." "I'm looking at a text message sent from Mr. Thompson's phone less than an hour ago," Harrison replied. "It orders the hit. You think we weren't monitoring your communications?" The color drained from Jake's face, and he sat down, his head in his hands. Tank cursed under his breath, and Razor closed his eyes in defeat. Maria stood up, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to make a suggestion," she began. Harrison nodded, allowing her to approach the bench. "The Storm Riders have shown us who they are," Maria began. "Perhaps this is an opportunity to show them who they could be. Instead of just punishment, maybe we can offer transformation." "What exactly are you suggesting, Judge Evans?" "Extensive community service. Let's make them rebuild what they've destroyed, not just at the coffee stand but throughout the neighborhood. Let them experience firsthand the community they've been terrorizing." Jake's head snapped up in surprise, replacing his anger. Harrison considered the proposal, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Thompson Harrison addressed him directly. "You have two choices. Option 1 is that I'll revoke your bail and add the new charges, which could amount to 20 years. Option 2 is that you and your entire organization commit to an intensive community service program under strict supervision. In this way, you'll rebuild what you've destroyed. You'll become mentors to at-risk youth and prove that you can be more than just thugs on motorcycles." The courtroom held its breath. Jake looked back at his gang members, saw the fear and uncertainty in their faces for the first time. It seemed to him that he'd realized just how much his leadership had cost them. "If we choose the community service," he asked, "then you'll have a chance to rewrite your story." Maria answered before Harrison could, saying that we could transform your organization from one that terrorizes the community to one that protects it. "The choice is yours," Harrison added, "but choose quickly. My patience, unlike Judge Evans, is not unlimited." Jake turned to his crew. Tank nodded slowly, followed by Razor. One by one, the Storm Riders showed their support for. Taking the deal, Jake said finally, was the right choice. "I'm glad you made that wise decision. But I want you to understand that if you make one more misstep and return to your old ways, you'll face the full weight of your original charges. Do you understand, my friend?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maria replied. As the details of the agreement were worked out, Maria, and Elena slipped out of the courtroom together. They drove back to Morning Light Coffee, where they found extensive damage. Broken windows, smashed equipment, and graffiti covering the walls. "Oh, Maria," Elena said softly. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Maria replied. "Let's get to work." Elena rolled up her sleeves, and the two of them began cleaning up the mess. Soon, community members arrived, bringing supplies and offers of help. Cleaning supplies, tools, and offers of help were provided. Tom Cooper was organizing a cleanup crew, and David Chun was already calling contractors. They tried to break us, Elena said, but they only made us stronger. Maria watched as more neighbors came to help. Sometimes the worst in people brings out the best in others. You think they'll really change? Elena asked, picking up a broom. The storm riders looked at the destruction around them, and then at the community coming together to rebuild. They'll have to, because now they're going to experience firsthand what real strength looks like. It's the strength of a community standing together. When morning came, there was something a little unusual going on at Morning Light Coffee. Jake Thompson and 5 other storm riders were standing a bit awkwardly in their court-mandated community service vests, watching as Maria outlined their restoration work. She pointed to the windows first, saying that they needed replacing. The equipment and finally the exterior. Everything needs to be better than it was before. Jake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. This is humiliating, he muttered. It's more humiliating than destroying a small business to prove your power, Maria countered gently. This isn't about humiliation, Mr. Thompson. It's about redemption. Tank was the first to step forward with a big smile on his face. Tell us what to do. The sooner we start, the sooner we finish. As the bikers began clearing debris, local news vans pulled into the parking lot. The story of a federal judge transforming a notorious biker gang through community service had caught the media's attention. No cameras, Jake growled, turning away from the reporters. Actually, Maria interjected, the cameras stay. The community needs to see this. They need to know you're serious about making amends. As the morning went on, things took on a rather unusual rhythm. The storm riders, stripped of their leather cuts and now working in bright orange vests, fell into a steady work pattern. Local contractors, initially a bit wary, began teaching them basic construction skills. Elena arrived with coffee for everyone, including the bikers. Jake stared at his cup in surprise when she handed it to him. Why? He asked, his voice quiet. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Elena replied. Even those who don't think we deserve a first one. As the day wore on, something unexpected began to happen. The bikers, forced to work alongside the very community they had terrorized, started to see things differently. The terrorized started seeing things differently. They heard stories about the businesses they'd threatened, the families they'd scared, and the lives they'd impacted. A young boy, maybe 12, approached the work site with his mother. He stared at Tank with wide eyes and asked, "Are you really fixing the coffee stand?" Tank paused. His work wiping sweat from his brow, he replied, "Yeah, kid, we're fixing what we broke. I thought you were the bad guys." The words hit Tank harder than any punch. He glanced at the other storm riders, seeing his own discomfort reflected in their faces. "We were," he admitted, "but maybe we're trying to be something different now." Maria was watching the interaction and noticed something different about the bikers' attitude. It was subtle, but she could tell there was a change. Later during their lunch break, Jake approached Maria. "This isn't what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" he asked. "Punishment and humiliation," Maria replied. "Not at all," Jake said. He gestured at the community members working alongside them. "This is what community looks like," he said. "This is what community looks like, Mr. Thompson. Not territory to control, but people to connect with. People who will help you if you let them." The afternoon brought more surprises. David Chun, whose restaurant had once been targeted by the storm riders, arrived with food for everyone. The bikers initially refused, but David was insistent. He told them, "You're doing good work. You deserve recognition." Razor, eating his meal, looked troubled. "We tried to shake him down last year," he whispered to Jake. "And now HEK is feeding us. That's what's been missing from your organization," Maria said, overhearing. "You've been so focused on taking from the community that you never experienced what it's like to be part of it." As the day drew to a close, it was so lovely to see the transformation already visible, not just in the partially restored coffee stand, but in the storm riders themselves. They worked with purpose, now taking pride. As the bikers worked, a small crowd gathered to watch, including some of the biker families. Tank's teenage daughter stood nearby, watching her father work with a mix of surprise and pride. "I've never seen him like this," she told Maria. "Sometimes people just need a chance to show who they really are." Maria replied, "Jake." Overhearing this, he stared at his hands. Calloused, he thought. Rather than fighting, we've been going about this all wrong. He said more to himself than anyone else. "It's not too late to go about it right," Maria answered. As the sun set, the first day of community service came to an end. The coffee stand was all ready. The storm riders were looking better, but more importantly, something had changed in them. Their earlier resentment had been replaced by something closer to purpose. At the same time the next day, Maria asked Jake. He looked at his crew, then back at the work they'd accomplished. "We'll be here," he said. "We've got a lot to make up for. This isn't just about making up for the past." Maria told him, "It's about building a different future." "Are you ready for that?" she asked. Jake met her eyes without anger or defiance. Maybe he was ready. Maybe we all are. The transformation of morning light coffee continued over the next few days were a bit challenging. On the fourth morning of community service, Maria arrived to find Jake and Tank in a heated argument with 3 members of a rival gang, the Iron Wolves. One of the Iron Wolves taunted the mighty Storm Riders, who were wearing orange vests and working hard. "You're a joke now," the Iron Wolf said. "Oh, this is just a joke." Tank's fists clenched, and his old instincts surfaced. But before he could react, Jake placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We've got work to do," Jake said calmly. "This isn't our game anymore." The Iron Wolves' leader, a man known as Viper, stepped forward. "Maybe we should take over your territory since you're too busy playing community helper." Maria approached her presence, trying to get everyone's attention. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Stay out of this," Judge Viper replied. "This is biker business." Jake interrupted, surprising everyone. "This is community business now," he said. "In this community, we handle things differently." The Iron Wolves laughed, but their amusement died when they noticed local residents gathering around, phones in hand, ready to record the interaction. Tom Cooper stood nearby, arms crossed, while David Chun and other business owners watched from their storefronts. Maria pointed out that they were surrounded by witnesses, including several law enforcement officers. "Having coffee across the street, it's time to make your next move." Viper glanced around, realizing the situation had shifted. "This isn't over, Thompson. You might regret going soft," as the Iron Wolves rode away. Tank turned to Jake. "Boss, we can't let them think we're weak. Being strong doesn't mean what we thought." "It did," Jake replied, picking up his tools and looking around. "We've got more respect now than we ever did through intimidation." The day's work continued, but the morning's confrontation had stirred something in the Storm Riders. During lunch, Razor approached Maria with an idea. "What if we used our skills for something good?" he suggested. He suggested we get to know every gang in the area and every trouble spot we could help protect. Instead of threatening businesses, we could provide them with a sense of security. Maria studied him thoughtfully, like community guardians instead of intimidators. "Exactly," she replied. "We've got the manpower and the network. We just need to use it differently." The idea spread through the crew like wildfire. By afternoon, the Storm Riders were brainstorming ways to transform their organization while they worked. Even Tank, who usually focused on muscle, contributed suggestions about youth outreach. "My daughter," he said hesitantly. "She's always saying I should do something positive with my life. Maybe this is it." Elena was watching the transformation unfold when she brought out a fresh pot of coffee. She told Jake, "This stand could be your first success story." She was talking about how from targets to protectors, we've got a lot to make up for. Jake paused his work, and he said, "We've caused trouble, but we can make up for it." Maria suggested, "Let's focus on one business and one person at a time." As the day went on, more community members stopped by, offering support and suggestions. A local youth counselor discussed programs where reformed bikers could mentor at-risk teens. A business association representative talked about community patrol possibilities. The Storm Riders were initially a bit skeptical, but they quickly found themselves drawn into these conversations. They realized that their street knowledge and organizational skills, which they had previously used for intimidation, could be valuable assets for community protection. Late afternoon brought another surprise. Tank's daughter arrived with several of her friends from the local high school. She called out, "Dad, we've got an idea. The community center needs volunteers for their after-school program." Tank looked at Jake, who was feeling uncertain. Jake nodded slowly and said, "We're serious." Jake answered, "Tell them we'll be there." As the sun began to set, Maria gathered everyone for a final meeting. The coffee stand was nearly restored, looking better than before. But something else had been restored too, a sense of purpose among the Storm Riders. "Tomorrow is the last official day of your community service here," Maria announced. "But this doesn't have to be the end of your community involvement," Jake said firmly. "We're just getting started on something new. The Storm Riders aren't finished. We're just beginning a new chapter." Tank added, glancing at his daughter. "It's a chapter worth being proud of." Maria watched as the bikers cleared their tools for the day, noting how they treated the coffee stand with a sense of ownership. They weren't treating it as territory to control, but as something they'd helped rebuild. "You know," Elena said quietly to her sister, "when this started, I thought you were crazy. But you saw something in them that everyone else missed. Them that everyone else missed. I saw people who needed a purpose bigger than themselves." "Elves," Maria replied. "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about transformation." As the storm riders prepared to leave, Jake lingered behind Judge Evans. He called out, "Thank you, not just for the second chance, but for showing. There was something worth changing for. The real test starts tomorrow." Maria reminded him, "When you're not required to be here, what will the storm riders choose to be?" Jake looked at his crew, then back at Maria, with newfound determination. Something better. Something that makes a difference. The sun set on another day of transformation. Everyone knew this was more than just community service. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the storm riders, but for an entire community. They were learning the true meaning of justice, redemption, and the power of second chances. This was the first test of the storm riders' transformation. The day after their official community service ended, the day came sooner than anyone expected. Morning Light Coffee opened early, and it was so lovely to see it restored. Maria arrived to find Jake and several storm riders already there. They were not in orange vests, but in their leather cuts, now modified with a new patch that read Community Guardian. "We figured the place might need protection," Jake explained, especially after the Iron Wolves' visit. Maria studied the new patches, and she said, "Your choice to be here." Jake nodded, and he explained that some of the crew didn't like the changes, but the ones who stayed were all in. The morning proceeded smoothly until a group of Iron Wolves motorcycles roared into the parking lot. This time they came in force, 15 bikes strong. Viper led them, his face twisted with contempt. "Well, look at this," Viper sneered. The storm riders, playing security guard, looked on. Jake stepped forward, Tank and Razor flanking him. Instead of aggression, his posture was calm. "Please come in and order coffee," he said kindly. "I'm sure you have no intention of causing trouble, but I just wanted to let you know that things are different now. The mighty storm riders have been reduced to protecting a coffee stand, but we're doing our best to keep things safe. Our community now, all of it." Marie watched the exchange from inside, noting how the storm riders maintained their composure. Even Tank, usually quick to anger, stood steady. Viper dismounted his bike, his crew following suit. "You've gone soft, Thompson. Someone needs to remind you what being a real biker means before tensions could things get any more intense." Well, they did. Several police cruisers pulled into the lot, but it wasn't just the police. Dozens of community members had arrived too, business owners, residents, even some of Tank's daughters, friends from the youth center. They formed a line behind the storm riders. "This is what being real means," Jake said. Viper gestured to the crowd, indicating that there were people and things worth protecting. He looked around and realized he was surrounded by not just cops and storm riders, but by an entire community. His sneer faltered. "You're making a mistake, Thompson," he growled. "This isn't over." Maria spoke up, stepping outside because right now, every business in this area is filing for protective orders against the Iron Wolves. Every incident will be documented, and every threat reported. You can choose to adapt, like the storm riders have, or you can face the consequences. The Iron Wolves shifted uncomfortably. They had come expecting a Viper asked Jake, "Is this going to be a gang fight, or is this your territory now?" Jake replied, "It's not about territory anymore. It's about community. You might want to think about that before you lose everything, like we almost did." Elena emerged from the coffee stand carrying a tray of cups. "Coffee's ready," she announced, her voice calm and welcoming. "Everyone's invited to our community meeting about neighborhood safety and the absurdity of the situation. We're turning what could have been a gang confrontation into a community coffee gathering. It's a new day." The tension broke, and Viper looked around, his eyes bright with hope. Viper looked at his crew, then back at the scene before him. The storm riders weren't backing down, but they weren't escalating either. They stood firm, supported by police and citizens alike. "This isn't how things work," Viper protested, but his voice held more confusion than threat. "Maybe it's time things worked differently," he added with a gentle smile. Tank suggested surprising everyone with his diplomatic tone. "The old way is a dead end," he said. "We figured that out. The question is, are you smart enough to figure it out too?" The Iron Wolves leader studied the scene for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head. "You've lost your minds," he declared, but his words lacked conviction. "Let's ride." As the Iron Wolves roared away, the community broke into applause. The Storm Riders had faced their first real test and passed it without throwing a single punch, which was really impressive. Maria told Jake, especially about the restraint learned from the best. Jake replied with a slight smile, "You showed us there's more power in standing together than in knocking people down." The impromptu community meeting turned into a genuine discussion about neighborhood safety. The Storm Riders, still in their modified cuts, contributed insights about potential trouble spots and solutions. "We know every alley, every corner where problems start." Razor explained to the group that instead of using that knowledge to cause trouble, we can use it to prevent it. Tank's daughter, who had arrived during the confrontation, beamed with pride as she watched her father help organize the neighborhood watch. "This is what being tough really means," she told Maria, "standing up for what's right even when your old friends think you're wrong." As the meeting continued, Elena pulled Maria aside when you first suggested rehabilitating them. "I thought you were naive," she admitted, "but you saw something in them that nobody else did." "I saw people who needed a purpose," Maria replied. "They had the strength and organization. They just needed to learn how to use it for something positive." The day ended with concrete plans for community patrols, youth outreach programs, and business protection strategies. All of these involved the reformed Storm Riders working alongside law enforcement and community-led leaders. As things wound down, Jake said to Maria, "When you first confronted us, I thought you were just another authority figure trying to push us around. But you weren't pushing us down. You were pushing us forward." Maria watched as the Storm Riders helped clean up from the meeting. They interacted easily with the same community members. "They once terrorized," she replied. "Sometimes, people just need to be shown a better path. The strength to walk it that was in you all along." Word of the Storm Rider transformation spread through the biker community like wildfire. Not everyone was happy about it. A week after the Iron Wolves confrontation, Maria arrived at Morning Light Coffee to find Jake in an intense discussion with former Storm Riders who had left the gang over the changes. "You're destroying everything we built," they accused. Steve Hammer, Harrison, former Storm Riders enforcer. "Years of reputation gone because you went soft." Jake remained calm, his new confidence evident. "What exactly did we build?" Hammer was afraid that we were losing our reputation. "Look around, though. We're building something real now." The coffee stand had become a symbol of change. The Storm Riders' new community center was taking shape next door. It had been converted from their old clubhouse. Through the windows, you could see Tank mentoring teenagers in a mechanics program. "You turned our clubhouse into a daycare," another former member said. "No," Jake corrected, "we turned it into a future." "Those kids you're mocking? They're learning skills and finding direction. They're just like we should have done years ago." Maria watched from inside, ready to intervene. But she recognized that Jake needed to handle this himself. Elena stood by her side, wiping the counter with a nervous hand. "Should we call the police?" she whispered. "Not yet," Maria replied softly. Hammer stepped closer to Jake, his voice dropping menacingly. "The other clubs are laughing at us," he said. "The Storm Riders used to mean something. We mean more now than we ever did," Jake responded. "We're not just taking from the community anymore. We're part of it, building it and protecting it." To prove his point, a group of local business owners arrived for their morning coffee. Instead of avoiding the bikers, they greeted Jake and his group warmly. The contrast was striking. It was so clear to see how different the old way was to the new. "This isn't over yet." Thompson and Hammer warned the old guard that they won't be able to stand for this. "The old guard needs to evolve," Tank said as he emerged from the community center. "Otherwise, they'll get left behind." The teenagers Tank had been mentoring through the windows. Including his daughter, their presence seemed to emphasize everything that had changed. "You're choosing them over us," Hammer demanded, gesturing at the community members. "Over your brothers." "I'm choosing a future over a past," Jake replied firmly. "Real strength over fear. Family over fear." Razor, who had been quiet until then, stepped forward. "Now, Hammer Freedom Brotherhood, let's remember why we started riding in the first place. We got a little lost along the way, and that's when things started to change. We started to become the very thing we used to hate. Bullies. It's a word that hung in the air for a while, and it made some of the former members shift uncomfortably. They might have seen their old behavior through new eyes. Maria finally stepped outside, and her presence added weight to the moment. Mr. Harrison addressed Hammer, saying, "You have a choice to make, just like Jake and his crew did. You can be part of something destructive or something constructive. The decision is yours." Hammer looked around, taking in the scene, the renovated coffee shop. The community center was full of young people, and there was a lot of respect in people's eyes when they looked at Jake. He said, "This isn't what bikers do," but his voice held more uncertainty than conviction. "Maybe it's time to redefine what bikers can be," Jake suggested. "We're still riding, and we're still brothers. We're just standing for something. Better now," said one of the teenagers from the community center. A young man named Marcus approached cautiously. "Mr. Tank has been teaching me motorcycle maintenance," he said proudly. "Maybe I could be a storm rider someday if I stay in school and keep my grades up." Hammer stared at the kid, then at Tank. "You're recruiting?" he asked. "From high schools, we're investing in the future," Tank replied. "My daughter helped me see that there's more to legacy than fear." The tension began to dissolve as more community members arrived, going about their morning routines. The scene was peaceful and productive. The old storm riders weren't there, but something new and wonderful had taken their place. Hammer shook his head. "You've changed, Thompson. All of you have changed for the better." Jake replied, "The invitation to change with us stands for all of you." The former members retreated to their bikes, but their exit lacked the threatening energy of their arrival. Something had shifted, not just in the storm riders, but in how others. As the morning settled back into its routine, Maria approached Ed and Jake, who couldn't have been easy. "It couldn't have been easier than continuing down the old path," Jake admitted. "We lost some brothers in this change," he said, "but we gained a family, a real one, inside the community center." Tank's mechanic class resumed. Through the window, they could see him teaching. He was patient and proud. His daughter sat nearby doing her homework and occasionally helping explain things to the younger kids. Elena said, bringing coffee to the group, "When you first started this transformation, I thought it was about justice, but it's about more than that, isn't it, Maria?" I watched as Jake greeted another group of local residents. His new role as community guardian was sitting naturally on his shoulders. "It's about redemption," she replied. "It's about seeing the potential for good in people even when they can't see it in themselves." From her usual spot, Maria watched as bikers from various groups filled the expanded seating area. She could see that Jake was feeling unsure about this, so she asked him quietly, "You sure about this?" "No," he admitted, "but it needs to be done. The old way of doing things is dying, and they just don't know it yet." The coffee stand had become neutral ground, respected even by those who opposed the storm rider transformation. Elena and Sarah worked steadily, serving coffee to leather-clad men who would have terrified them just weeks ago. Jake stood before the gathered bikers, his modified storm riders cutting, drawing both curious and disapproving looks. "For coming," he began, "we've got a prop position for all of you. This better be good. Thompson, the Red President of the Desert Hawks, you've been stirring up a lot of trouble with this community with your guardian nonsense." "That's exactly what we need to talk about," Jake replied. "The world's changing. Either we change with it, or we become obsolete. Or we become obsolete." He gestured to the community center next door, where a full-on tanks and mechanics program was in full swing through the windows. They could see teenagers learning to repair motorcycles, their faces eager and focused. "That's not weakness," Jake continued. "That's not selling out. That's building. A future, a real legacy Viper." The Iron Wolves leader, who had confronted them earlier, leaned forward. He was talking about a legacy of what playing nice with cops and citizens looks like. He was talking about a legacy of respect. Tank spoke up, joining Jake. He said, "Real respect, not fear. My daughter's proud of me for the first time in her life." Can any of you say that the question really struck a chord with several bikers, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats? Razor stepped forward and addressed the group with a warm smile. "We've got something really special happening here. The community trusts us now, and we're making a real difference, not just causing trouble." "What about territory?" Someone called out. "You just gave that up, territory, Jake?" We laughed together, sharing a moment of joy. "We've gained so much influence now, more than we ever imagined. Businesses seek us out for help, and kids look up to us. It's truly a beautiful thing." Maria observed the reactions in the room. Some bikers nodded thoughtfully, while others scowled. But they were all listening. "Here's the deal," Jake continued. "We're starting a new chapter. Coalition motorcycle clubs are all about community protection and youth mentorship. We've already got programs up and running, we've got connections with some great businesses, and we've even got support from the police. You want us to become Boy Scouts?" Red laughed. Jake replied, "I want us to become what we always claimed to be, brothers. Helping our community, not parasites feeding off it." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Even the most hardened bikers couldn't deny the truth. Maria stepped forward, then added her voice to the discussion. The storm riders have done here isn't just about following the law. It's about finding purpose. Real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them believe in you. Tank's daughter, Chelsea, entered the coffee stand carrying some paperwork from the community center. She moved confidently through the crowd of bikers, no longer afraid of them. The youth program's already got 20 kids signed up. Next month, she told her father, 3 of them want to join the Junior Mechanics Club. The sight of Tank, once the most feared enforcer in the Storm Riders. Everyone could see the pride in his eyes as he listened to his daughter's report. This is what we're offering, Jake said, gesturing to the scene. A chance. To be part of something bigger than ourselves, to build instead of destroy. Viper stood up slowly and, with a gentle smile, replied, If we don't want to join your little transformation, then we'll get left behind. Jake's eyes twinkled as he added, This is the future. The only question is whether you'll be part of it. The meeting continued as bikers chatted about the programs and community involvement. They asked lots of questions about the programs, the community involvement, and the changes in law enforcement and relationships. Some people were still a bit skeptical, but others were really interested. Later on, as the group started to leave, Maria heard 2 younger bikers talking. One of them said quietly, Maybe that mechanics program isn't such a bad idea. Elena approached Maria and watched the bikers leave. Do you think any of them will actually change? She asked. Some will, Maria replied. Changes like that start small, but they spread. The Storm Riders have shown us that it's possible. That's often all people need. They just need proof that there's another way, Jake said. He joined them, looking tired but satisfied. He had never thought he'd be doing something like this. He admitted that he was trying to change the whole culture. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest steps. Maria reminded him, like a judge serving coffee or a biker choosing to protect instead of intimidate. As the sun set on the coffee stand, the last of the motorcycles roared away. But something had shifted in the biker community that day. A seed of change had been planted, and it was so exciting to see how far its roots would spread. A month after the Biker Coalition meeting, Morning Light Coffee was buzzing with unprecedented activity. The transformed Storm Riders had successfully launched their community protection program, and the results were. Jake was excited to report to Maria that 3 more clubs had joined the coalition this week. He also shared that Red's Desert Hawks were starting to come around, and the Iron Wolves were on board. Maria was pleased to hear that even Viper, who had been the most resistant, was holding out, but half of his crew had been asking about the youth programs. Change was in the air. The coffee stand had become something of a command center for the reformed bikers, with maps on the walls showing patrol routes and safety zones, a bulletin board displaying success stories and upcoming events, and Sarah, who was no longer nervous around the bikers, calling out from the counter. The Tanks group prevented another break-in, which was great news. In last night's 3rd incident this month, the morning's peace was interrupted by the roar of approaching motorcycles. Instead of tension, the sound now brought curiosity. Viper pulled up alone, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. Thompson called out to Jake, "We need to talk." Jake exchanged glances with Maria before stepping outside. The 2 biker leaders moved to a quiet corner of the parking lot. Their conversation was intense but controlled. Elena watched from inside and thought, "I never thought I'd see those 2 having a civil conversation. So sometimes the hardest step is admitting you need to change," Maria replied, remembering how far the Storm Riders had come after several minutes. Jake and Viper entered the coffee stand together. The Iron Wolves leader looked a little out of place in this peaceful setting, but there was determination in his eyes. Judge Evans addressed Maria directly. "I've been watching what's happening here. The changes the community work, my guy. They're restless. They see the Storm Riders earning real respect," he said warmly. Not just fear, Maria thought, though she suspected she knew what was coming. "Maybe it's time the Iron Wolves evolved too." Jake said, "You're the one who started all this. You saw something worth saving in them." Maria studied him carefully. "I saw people capable of being more than their past. What do you see when you look at your club's future?" Bipper glanced around the coffee stand, taking in the transformation. The community bulletin board caught his eye, particularly a photo of Tank teaching teenagers to ride motorcycles. "Maintenance," my nephew said quietly. "He's 14 and got in trouble last week for stealing. His mom asked me to talk to him, but what am I supposed to say? Don't be a criminal like your uncle or Jake suggested. You could show him there's another way like we're doing here." Tank emerged from the community center, leading a group of teenagers who had just completed their morning mechanics lesson. Among them was his daughter Chelsea, now a regular instructor in the program. Mr. Viper, Chelsea approached confidently. We've got room in our next mechanics class. If any Iron Wolves kids want to join, Dad says motorcycle skills should be passed down the right way. You could see the range of emotions cross Viper's face. You're teaching kids for free, not just teaching, Tank replied. Mentoring, showing them there's more to brotherhood than causing trouble. Maria watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. This was how real change happened, not through force or fear but through example and opportunity. The Iron Wolves have a reputation, Viper said slowly. Not all of it good, so did we, Jake. He was reminded that reputations can change. Just look at us now. Businesses call us for protection, parents trust us with their kids, and cops work with us instead of against us. Sarah approached with coffee for everyone, including Viper. He stared at the cup in surprise, much as Jake had done weeks ago. The community is always ready to welcome those who want to help build it up. Maria told him the question is, are you ready to be those people? Before Viper could respond, there was a commotion outside. Drew everyone's attention. A group of teenagers on motorcycles, led by Hammer's son, had pulled into the parking lot. They were part of a new troublemaking crew calling themselves the Young Wolves. My nephews, Viper muttered. Jake straightened up. This is your chance. Show him what real leadership looks like. The moment hung in the balance as Viper considered his options. Finally, he squared his shoulders and walked outside, but not with his usual aggressive stance. Instead, he approached the young riders with purpose. Tommy, he called to his nephew. You and your friends need to come inside. There's something you need to see. The teenagers exchanged uncertain looks, but there was no mistaking the authority in Viper's voice. One by one, they dismounted and followed him into the coffee stand. Welcome to Morning Like Coffee, Maria, she greeted them. I believe Tank's about to start another mechanics lesson. Anyone interested? What followed was a turning point, not just for the Iron Wolves, but for the entire biker community. As Viper watched his nephew's eyes light up during Tank's lesson, he saw a shift in his expression. Okay, he finally said, turning to Jake and Maria, show me how this works. Show me how to make the Iron Wolves into something worth being proud of. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Former rivals working together, teaching the next generation, building something positive. That's what Elena said to Maria when you first confronted the Storm Riders. I thought you were just serving justice, but you were serving something more important. Hope, Maria replied, watching the transformation. Keep on unfolding. That's often the most powerful thing you can offer someone, the hope of being better than they are. 6 weeks after Viper's decision to transform the Iron Wolves, Morning Light Coffee hosted its first official community unity event. The parking lot had been transformed into a festival space with booths showcasing the various programs the Reformed Motorcycle Club had initiated. If you'd told me 3 months ago that we'd be hosting a family event with bikers, Elena laughed, setting up the coffee station, I'd have said you. It was incredible. The Storm Riders and Iron Wolves worked side by side, setting up displays about their amazing youth mentorship programs, community patrols, and motorcycle safety classes. The Tanks and Mechanics Workshop had expanded to include members from 3 different clubs, teaching local teens. Jake was standing by the main stage, looking a little uncomfortable in his role as keynote speaker. Maria approached, carrying his coffee. She was nervous, and she asked him, terrified? He replied, give me a gang fight any day over public speaking. Just speak from the heart. With a smile, she reminded him that's what got us here in the first place. The event drew hundreds of community members, including families who once would have crossed the street to avoid bikers. Children ran around wearing miniature versions of the new Community Guardian patches, while teenagers clustered around the mechanics demonstration area. Hammer, who had been one of the most vocal opponents of the changes, arrived unexpectedly with his son. They stood at the edge of the crowd watching Tank teach a group of kids about engine maintenance. I never thought I'd see this, Hammer muttered as Maria approached the mighty Storm Riders running a carnival. It's more than that, Maria replied. Look closer around them. The scene tells a story of transformation. Viper's nephew Tommy was helping younger kids with a motorcycle safety demonstration. Chelsea Tank's daughter was running a booth about the youth mentorship program she'd helped design. Even some of the older, hardcore bikers were engaged, sharing stories with interested community members about their journey from intimidation to protection. Your son seems interested, Maria noted, watching Hammer's boy drift toward the mechanics area. He's always loved bikes. Hammer admitted, I just never thought about teaching him the right way. Together, we're building something amazing. Look around at all the booths and activities. This is strength. This is power. We're not forcing it. We're choosing it every day. We're choosing to be better than we were. Maria watched as his words resonated with the crowd. Even Hammer seemed affected, especially when Jake spoke about legacy. What do we want our kids to remember about us? Jake asked. Do we want them to remember us as tough guys who scared people? Or do we want them to remember us as the ones who stood up and made a difference? The afternoon continued with more demonstrations and activities. The police chief, who had come to support the event, found himself in a friendly motorcycle maintenance discussion with Tank and several other reformed bikers. It was so lovely to see former adversaries becoming partners in protecting the neighborhood. As the sun began to set, Hammer approached. Jake and Maria, his usual gruff demeanor had softened somewhat. My boy, he said hesitantly. He wants to join the youth mechanics program. He says he wants to learn from Tank. Jake smiled. Class starts Monday. He'll need a parent to sign the permission form. Hammer nodded slowly. Maybe you've got room for an old mechanic to help teach. I've been working on bikes for 30 years. Always room for more mentors. Jake replied, understanding the significance of the offer. As the festival wound down and evening approached, its impact was clear. Business owners chatted easily with bikers about neighborhood safety. Parents exchanged contact information for youth programs. The barrier between them and us had begun to crumble. Elena joined Maria as they watched the cleanup effort, where bikers and community members worked together. It's so inspiring to see how they've worked together with such ease and familiarity. I'm amazed at how they've managed to change not just themselves, but also everyone else around them. It's incredible to see how they've transformed not just their actions, but also the way people see them and each other. That's the real transformation, isn't it? Maria agreed, her eyes shining with joy. It's not just about changing actions, but also perceptions and possibilities. As the last booths were packed away, Jake gathered the bikers for a final word. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. Shadows as former rivals stood together, their cuts displaying various club patches, but all bearing the new community guardian symbol. This is just the beginning, he told them. We're rewriting what it means to be bikers, what it means to be a community, and we're doing it together. Maria watched them, remembering that first confrontation at the coffee stand. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest stands, like a judge serving coffee or a biker choosing to protect instead of intimidate, were part of the transformation. It wasn't complete, but it was real and growing. It had all started because someone saw the potential for good in those societies that had been written off as lost causes. 1 year after Maria Evans first confronted the Storm Riders at Morning Light Coffee, the stand had become the heart of a transformed community. The morning sun rose on a special celebration. The official opening of the Ritters Community Youth Center, converted from what had once been an abandoned warehouse. The gangs used for trouble. Maria arrived early as she always did on her Wednesday shifts to find Jake already there. He stood looking at a series of photographs documenting their journey from that first confrontation to, It's hard to believe it's been a year, he said with a smile as Maria joined him. She looked at him with a little doubt in her eyes. I know, he replied, his eyes twinkling. He gestured to a group of teenage apprentices arriving for their morning mechanics lesson with Tank. No chance, he said with a wink. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of what we're building. The youth center was a testament to how far they'd come. The Wing House is so proud to announce the expansion of our tanks and the addition of a certified mechanics program for vocational training. We've also created a new section with classrooms where former bikers teach everything from motorcycle safety to business skills. The main hall serves as a community gathering space where everyone is welcome. Elena arrived with Sarah, who were carrying boxes of delicious pastries for the celebration. You should see the amazing lineup outside. Elena reported that half the neighborhood is here already, including some surprises. Sarah added with a meaningful look as if on cue, a familiar. The air was filled with the rumble of motorcycles, which brought smiles to everyone's faces. The Iron Wolves rolled in, led by Viper, followed by the Desert Hawks and 3 other formerly rival clubs. All their cuts now bore the Community Guardian patch alongside their club insignia. What's more, who came with them but Hammer riding with his son behind him, both wearing newly modified Storm Riders cuts. I never thought I'd see that Tank, he said, joining them outside. His daughter Chelsea stood beside him now, all grown up. Time, the youth program coordinator, was delighted to see the parking lot fill up quickly with an unlikely mix of bikers, families, business owners, and community leaders. Even Judge Harrison arrived, her stern demeanor softening as she watched former defendants now leading community programs. "You were right," she told Maria quietly. "Sometimes justice needs a different approach." The ceremony began with Jake at the podium, looking far more comfortable with public speaking than he had a few months ago. Behind him, the youth center's sign read, "Rising Ritters Community Center, building tomorrow's leaders." A year ago, Jake, we thought we were strong because we made people fear us. But today, we're truly strong because we help people believe in themselves. This center isn't just about transforming buildings. It's about transforming lives. He gestured to the gathered crowd. "Look around. See all these former rivals working together. Kids learning from mentors who used to be their neighborhood's biggest threat. Families feeling safe because we protect instead of intimidate." Viper stood with his nephew Tommy. Tommy is now one of the youth program's success stories. Red and his Desert Hawks had become instrumental in the community. The patrol program was so inspiring. Even some of the most hardened former gang members had found purpose in mentorship roles. But none of this would have happened if it weren't for Jake. He continued, "If one person hadn't seen beyond who we were to who we could be, we wouldn't be here today." He turned to Maria Judge Evans, who didn't just serve us coffee that morning. She served us a chance at redemption, and that changed everything. Maria hadn't planned to speak, but Jake's gesture brought her to the podium, looking out at the gathered faces. So many lives touched by this transformation. She found the words, "I'm not standing here as a judge," and began, "I'm here as a member of this community. What we've witnessed this past year isn't just about reformed bikers or successful programs. It's about the power of believing in people's capacity to change." She looked at Elena, remembering her sister's initial fear of the bikers. Now Elena was helping coordinate youth program meals and mentoring young entrepreneurs. This coffee stand became more than just a business. It became a symbol of transformation. But the real change wasn't in the building or the programs. It was in hearts and minds. It was in the choice to be better than we were yesterday. The ceremony continued with ribbon cuttings, tours, and celebrations. Young apprentices proudly demonstrated their mechanical skills. Former rivals shared laughs over coffee. Children played safely under the watchful eyes of their newfound community guardians as evening approached. Maria found herself back at the coffee stand with Jake, Elena, and Tank. The sunset painted the sky in colors of promise as they reflected on their journey. "You know what I realized," Tank said, watching his daughter lead a group of young teens through a program orientation. "We were always looking for respect. In all the wrong places now, you've got something real to be proud of," Elena added, serving a fresh round of coffee. Jake nodded, looking out at their transformed community. "We all do, and this is just the beginning," he said, smiling. Maria had asked, though she knew his answer. It was about showing other communities that it's possible. Jake replied that change isn't just about programs or buildings. It's about believing in better possibilities. As night fell, the celebration wound down, but the energy of transformation remained. The coffee stand that had once been a battleground now stood as a beacon of hope. The bikers who had meant to intimidate had become protectors, and a community that had lived in fear now thrived in unity. Maria's Wednesday morning shifts at Morning Light Coffee continued, but now they meant something different. Each cup served was a reminder that justice comes in many forms, and sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. The story of how a judge serving coffee changed a community had spread far beyond their neighborhood. Other clubs from other cities began reaching out, seeking guidance on their own transformations. The ripple effect just kept on growing, proving that one person standing up for what's right could inspire others to do the same. As the last guests left the celebration, Maria looked at the coffee stand where it all began, and then at the new youth center that represented where they were heading. Some people might call this a happy ending, but Elena said, "I don't think that's quite right." Maria replied, "I agree. Watching a new group of bikes arrive, I can see that this isn't an ending at all. It's a beginning, and the best stories never really end. They just inspire new ones to start."